Chair. I would remind you, if you have cell phones with you, please be sure that they are in the silent mode, and take a few moments to greet someone that you haven't had a chance to say hello to yet today. Will you all join me in singing America?
Rotarians and guests, this is a special invocation from a Rotarian from North Carolina. His name is Phil Morris. It is good to recognize how different we are. Our talents, our dreams, our backgrounds, our occupations. And it is good to know that when you created each of us, you broke the mold. No one is exactly like anyone else. Even our thumbprint and our voice crack tells us how unique we are. Yet we thank you that we can make these differences and mobilize them for the good of Rotary and our community. In our differences, we can think the same thoughts and move together toward a common goal. Bless us as we meet together. Thank you for our individuality and also for our common bond. Amen.
Amen.
You may be seated. Part of the reason you need to be seated is so folks who have birthdays this month can stand up as I read their names. So, happy birthday to Vicki Edwards, Tim Forster, Bill Hempel, Alan Johnson, George McCulley, Todd Nelson, Jeff Robinson, Con Sheffer, Jan Shin, Mary Spildy, Greg Stewart, Steve Stone, and Don Tyson. Mike Retzian will make introductions today and also handle happy dollars. Mike?
Well, Rotarians and guests, we would like to welcome visiting Rotarians from other clubs. We're going to start with two Rotarians from the Metropolitan Club, Annette Spickard, Classification Tax Administration, and Howard Feynman, Classification Law. Please stand. Welcome. And we would like to welcome one visiting Rotarian from the Delta Club. Please stand. Mike Hartwig, Classification CPA. I thought all the CPAs were in a tax cave right about now. Okay, with that, those Rotarians that have guests, please stand at your table by your guests. I will come around with the microphone and you may introduce them yourself.
Fellow Rotarians, I'm Craig Smith. I'm pleased to introduce Jennifer Geller, who's is a colleague of mine on the school board and is considered the law today for second
I'm John Wolf, and my guest today is Susan Jokate from KKNX Radio.
Good afternoon, Rotarians and speaker staff, and my guest today is my wife, Raven, and I'm occupational therapist.
My name is Phil Barnhart, and I'm very pleased to have as my guest today Nancy Nathanson, who is the state representative from North Eugene.
I'm Dan Montgomery, and glad to introduce Joe Haas with Haas Financial. Rotarians guest, my name is Gary Pierpoint. My guest today is Dr. Joe Womack, President of Northwest Michigan University.
Have we missed anyone? Welcome. Now, dig deep, think what is making you happy right now and get some dollars out. Happy dollars. Hook. Mark Metzger. What makes you happy today?
Well, Mike's going to have fun with this. Mark Metzger, local Fox station. Happy afternoon. I became a grandpa at 3 this morning.
He's looked like a grandpa for years.
Terry, yes, I'm Bart Costin. I have $5 really grassy dollars there. I'm happy my daughter and my middle grandson, who's a freshman at Merritt's High School, came back from a 2-week trip in China with an exchange with Merritt's High School, a high school over in China, so it was quite a trip.
I'm very happy, happy buck. I spent 7 days in the San Francisco area, 558 miles to get there, and there's 560 miles driving around the Bay Area in various things. And I realized how much I like Eugene.
Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. I'm Dale Smith. I have 70 Moroccan dirhams. I just returned from Morocco. I spent 11 days there, and I spent a week at the oldest university in the world, helping them improve their internet connectivity so that they could include online materials in their curriculum and research.
This is like 5 cents. It's like a down payment on the ballot.
It's $10. It's $10.
Oh, hey, $10. Thank you. Who else is happy here? Smiling and happy and just got that sunshine in your heart and oh, yes, smiling and happy. Okay, thank you. Oh, one hand came up there. Mr. Scott Palmer.
Okay, John, that's going to cost you $4. We're not a funny club. I'm Scott Palmer, and this is for my good. Many people don't know that years and years ago, my wife and I bought Gary's house when he was in one of his places when he was moving to Portland or Lake Oswego or something like that. So he had his house. So I have $3 unhappy dollars and $2 happy dollars. The $2 happy dollars were that none of the really big trees on the lot fell on our house during the big snow and windstorm. The $3 unhappy dollars were for the 3 trees that did come down, including the beautiful manzanita that was out in the front. So we're going to have to replace that. And if anybody needs any firewood, I've got some.
Another one. Yes, Emily.
And I have 50 pesos because I'm really happy that our little granddaughter in Mexico's surgery was successful today.
I rushed my last message because I knew he was anxious to cut me down. But I also want to thank, I'm also happy daughter's husband was a Navy SEAL, and he was able to get home from Afghanistan to see that baby born.
Thank you. We would have been happier yesterday, as the congressman pointed out, with all that sun. So let's root for sun for next Tuesday. I think it's in the forecast. Before we have our raffle, I want to mention that Bob Loudon has been in the hospital for 3 weeks. There was a complication of some relatively easy surgery, but they think that he's on the mend. I have a couple of cards I'll pass around that you can sign for Bob. And he can have visitors, so if anyone wants to go out to Riverbend and see him, they can do that. So Mike Bevray has our raffle.
Today, we just have cash. Uh, 4063. 4063. Great, thank you.
So, for announcements, Gene asked me to remind you that if you wanted to go out to the Barron's Den on Thursday at 5:30, it's $22 per person, and he needs your money today. We also have an announcement from Jerry Harris. Jerry?
So there's a great big 11 by 17 sheet on each table, so don't tell me you missed it. It's going to be sign-ups for April 14th. That's a Saturday, 8 to about noon. We want to finish a little earlier. There's also a place where you can put alongside your name different tools you may be able to bring. If anybody can bring a gas-powered weed whacker or cutter, that would be great. Our mason that helped us out a couple of years ago to put the first section of steps in isn't available on the 14th, but he has told me he's willing to do another set of steps with us in May or June. So we'll have a smaller work party if we can get that together. But please help us out on the 14th. I think we've already had about 9 people sign up online and for about 20 or so. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry. Today, Nathan Phillips will be introducing our program. Nathan?
Thank you, Liz. Well, our speaker today is Computer DeFazio. I don't think he needs any introduction.
I always encourage people to keep the introduction short. That was the shortest ever. Special award. Thanks. I'm just back from Washington. Congress is on a 2-week break for Easter, and I'll be traveling around the district for 2 weeks and talking to a number of Rotaries and Eugene City Club, Springfield City Club, and others. And I'm going to sort of give you a report on what mostly hasn't been going on in Washington and what should be going on in Washington. It was last week was pretty discouraging. We've been trying to do a transportation bill for some time. And, you know, when people say, what do you think Congress should do to put America back to work? And I say we need to invest in rebuilding our 20th century transportation infrastructure and start to build out a 21st century infrastructure. A lot of times people say to me, well, that's all well and good, but I don't work in construction. I say, no. It's much bigger than construction when you look at the problems and the needs and what goes into it. We have more than 140,000 bridges on the federal highway system that need substantial substantial rehabilitation or repair. That's steel. We have the strongest Buy America requirements for transportation investment. That's steel for those bridges, concrete, yes, construction workers, it's engineering, design, it's other things. We have 40% of the pavement on the national highway system, which has failed, not just overlayment, but substantial rehabilitation needs to be done. Sand and gravel outfits, people who make paving, construction workers, and then you get over toward transit. Has a $70 billion backlog in our existing transit system for critical infrastructure needs. That would be light rail, that would be subway, that would be buses, and all of these things have to be made in the United States of America. So you get high-tech, manufacturing, engineering, all these things that go into that. We've got American Bridge over in Reedsport, desperately in need of contracts. There's a lot of bridges they could be rebuilding. We've got Oregon Iron Works up in Portland making the first made America streetcars in 70 years due to one of those horrible earmarks people like to talk about. I got an earmark in the last transportation bill. Portland was going to buy a bunch of streetcars and said, we have the only place we can get streetcars is Czechoslovakia. And I said, well, we'd like to do something about that. We'd like to put out a request for a proposal to make a made in America streetcar. And they did, went through competitive bidding, and Oregon Iron Works got the contract. They are now, I think they have about 15 cars on the contract, and they're bidding in a lot of other places. So these are real jobs, real investments, and then obviously it spreads from the sectors directly involved to people who have small businesses that supply those sectors, and then spreads throughout the economy. These are investments we need to be making. During the Bush administration, we had two commissions that were named, and that was the Republicans controlled the House, the White House, and the Senate. So no one can say, gee, that was a Democratic setup. Those two commissions came to the same conclusion. We need to double our existing investment in our infrastructure just to bring the existing system up to a state of good repair. And if we want to start building a 21st century system, then it's going to take even more money than that. They're very specific. Both commissions came to the same conclusion. So, fast forward to last week. Last week, I tried with others to force a vote on a 2-year transportation bill that came out of the Senate. Now, when I have to look to the Senate for help, we're really in deep trouble, I'll tell you, because that's an incredibly dysfunctional body. But they managed, on a bipartisan basis, to come together and vote out a 2-year surface transportation bill at robust levels of funding that would put hundreds of thousands of people to work doing some of these things I just talked about. They also adopted some streamlining policies that we need for the Federal Department of Transportation to move these projects along faster, cut some of the unnecessary red tape. It's a pretty good bill. I think we could write yet a better bill, and I think I was in the process of doing that 2 years ago, but it's pretty decent. Half of the Republicans in the Senate voted for it. That's pretty unusual these days. They had 74 votes in the United States Senate for this bill. And now in the House, they're trying an experiment, and unfortunately it's a failed experiment. Dwight David Eisenhower was the president who had the vision and finally delivered on the promises that have been made by presidents before him to build out a national transportation system for the United States of America. And since 1956, in all those years, we have never ever had a partisan transportation bill. Well, unfortunately, my colleagues in the House decided that they wanted to try and write a partisan transportation bill without a single Democratic vote. And it's not going so well. They did manage to force a bill out of committee that would reduce infrastructure investment and would take wood transit from the Highway Trust Fund. It was actually Ronald Reagan's wood transit into the Highway Trust Fund. But they managed to muscle that bill out of committee. Unfortunately, their own caucus is wildly divided over the bill, and they can't move the bill out of their own caucus because they have 50 to 70 people, and this is your vocabulary lesson for today, who believe in devolution. That's devolution. Devolution is that the federal government would devolve the duty to set up a national transportation system to the 50 states and the territories. Now that's, of course, what we had before 1956, before Dwight Eisenhower, and here was the result. That is the beautiful, brand spanking new Kansas Turnpike. Oklahoma said, we'll build our segment. Oklahoma didn't build their segment. It ended in Amos Schweitzer's farm field. Now, he was a nice guy, and he didn't farm that part up close to the end of the freeway because people kept launching themselves off of it, so he just plowed it up so they'd have a soft landing. And, you know, then it was 6 years before Oklahoma delivered. Actually, because of the fact this was 56, because we adopted a national transportation policy. And there are a substantial number in the Republican caucus who believe this is the future. Well, I hope that's not the future. It's not going to work for America. We're going to compete with the likes of China spending 9.5% of their GDP building a modern infrastructure for their country, with Brazil at 5%, with India at 5%. Even Great Britain, who's adopted incredible austerity measures, says the one place we're not going to cut is investing in improving our transportation system. We want to more efficiently move our goods and our people, and we want the jobs that comes with it. But here, we have those who say, no, this is not, the federal government should not be involved in transportation. Now, the problem in the caucus is they have another 35 or 40 Republicans who say, wait a minute, you're not going to kill off funding for transit, and you're not going to cut the program. So they're just all hung up around the axle over there. So last week we tried to force a vote on the Senate bill and say, look, I mean, let's just do the Senate bill for 2 years, see what happens after the next election, and come back and work on a 5-year bill then. They refused to do that, instead passed a 90-day extension. And they claim that the 90-day extension doesn't hurt, but I talked to Oregon Department of Transportation, and we're getting in reports from other states around the country saying, no, actually, 90 days means this next construction season, we're going to pull back on what we let, because we don't know what happens after 90 days, and if we let too many contracts and federal support doesn't come, we're on the hook, and we don't have the money, and we have balanced budget requirements, unlike the federal government. So all across America, as we're getting into the construction season, states are cutting back. It's a real shame. So I'm going to continue to push them hard and hope that we can get this done. We need this investment in our country. Some people do say to me, well, Congressman, we tried that under the stimulus and it didn't work. Well, less than 7% of the money in that stimulus went to anything that could be categorized as infrastructure investment. 4% went to transportation. 4% of the $800 billion went to transportation. $420 billion went to tax cuts. Now, I don't think the tax cuts did too good of a job putting people back to work. If we had invested a fraction of that in infrastructure, we would have put many, many more people back to work. So second issue that hasn't happened, but I have a little more hope for in the near term, is my proposal with Greg Walton and Kurt Schrader on the ONC lands here in Oregon. Quick history lesson, the ONC lands are absolutely statutorily unique. They have a unique history. As Oregon and California was a railroad that was built down to California. Back in those days, the federal government gave away land to incentivize the railroads to build. And the ONC Railroad was bought out by Southern Pacific, and Southern Pacific violated the terms of the agreement. As the very short version of it, the government took the land back, but the land had been on the tax rolls. Over 2.5 million acres in Oregon had been on the tax rolls. The federal government took the land back from SP. So they said, well, then, obviously, even in those days, the counties were pretty exercised about that, saying, we're going to lose revenue and we can't tax the federal government. They said, we will write a special statute for the ONC land. So they did. And the statute says, it's very unique. It's not like National Forest statute at all. It says that these lands are supposed to be managed and harvested on a sustainable basis, and the revenues will be shared with the counties. It's quite specific. Right now, when I was elected to Congress the year before, they harvested 1.58 billion board feet on the ONC lands. I would say that was too high of a harvest level. It was not sustainable. And in fact, when I ran for Congress back in '86, I said we're harvesting too much. Well, this last year on ONC lands, they harvested less than 10% of that. So I would say there's somewhere between those two numbers is an equitable balance. We've been fighting forest wars for more than a quarter of a century. And the fight started over the remaining old growth. The big old trees that are still out there. And then the surrogate for the old growth became the spotted owl. And then we had the Clinton Forest Plan, which I opposed, which purported to resolve this issue. It said, well, we'll have lower but predictable levels of harvest for the timber industry, and revenues for the counties, and we will have, and we'll save the spotted owl. Look, and the environmental groups were very enthusiastic. The timber industry was lukewarm. I told the environmental groups, don't go there, because actually, what you don't realize is it doesn't save the old ones, which is where you started the fight. It might save the surrogate, that's the spotted owl, but it isn't going to save the old growth. The Clinton Harvest Plan was to harvest more than 40% of the annual harvest out of old growth for the indefinite future, which would pretty much eliminate it within 25 years. That's sort of been where we've been hung out now for years. There's endless appeals and litigation. On this end, there are many appeals and litigation that have stopped any even modest harvest. On the industry side, they filed a court case, which is pending in the Washington District Court, Washington, D.C., saying they should harvest over 1 billion board feet a year from the ONC lands. And so for those who say, we don't need to do anything, I'd say, if you want to save the old growth, you better do something, because it's at risk in the litigation or implementation of the Clinton Forest Plan. And for those who want to get a sustainable harvest at reasonable levels, I say, we need legislation to get there. And then the third element of this, of course, is our counties. Our counties are principally dependent upon these revenues for their general fund. And with the end of the potential end of that was the other element, by the way, of the Senate transportation bill. It contained a continuation of the guaranteed payments to counties while we're developing a long-term solution. So that means with a 90-day delay, the county's best expectation is that that might get passed 3 days before they begin their next fiscal year, which means they have to send out the layoff notices now over 3 months. We're talking, in some counties, you're talking about dissolution. Curry County, we talked to the governor about it, sent a letter saying, there's no bankruptcy provisions, but we might have to dissolve. Josephine's not far behind. Lane is talking about drastic cutbacks in law enforcement, the jail, no more, maybe down, I don't even know if they're going to be able to maintain any rural patrols, and that doesn't just affect people in rural areas, it affects all of us. So something needs to be done on a long-term basis. Beginning of the year, this Congress, we divided it up. New House rules wouldn't allow us to continue the payments, so the senators took up the issue of continuing the payments, and it did get into the Senate transportation bill. And I said, we'll work on our side on a management plan. We'll put forward a management plan that I think is an excellent proposal. If you read the Registered Guard, it says we're going to clear cut 1.5 million acres, according to the environmentalists and some county commissioners. Well, no, we're not. In fact, we're going to take all the remaining old growth, defined by a scientific panel, and we're going to move that over to the Forest Service. We're going to leave it. We'll manage for fire and insect devastation, those sorts of things, but we're not going to manage it for timber. That leaves more than half of the ONC lands with younger stands of timber, mostly previously harvested, to be managed. We would manage those on a sustainable basis. Half of it would be managed on a 120-year rotation, which means those trees are going to grow pretty big before they're harvested. Half would be managed on more of a standard rotation. The harvest would be dispersed over what's already checkerboard, so it's not going to be 500-acre clear cuts or 1.5 million acre clear cuts. They would have a mandate to do this on a sustainable long-term basis. And the trust that would manage this would be a trust appointed by the governor of Oregon. And the beneficiaries of the trust would be the counties in terms of the revenues that would flow. This wouldn't give the counties everything they need, but it would, in my opinion, we're still working through this with forest economists, over a long term it would probably provide a higher level of payments than we're getting this year, and certainly way higher than zero, which is where we might be headed next year. So we're pushing on that. We introduced the bill. We've been working for quite some time with the Resources Committee, and We're hopeful that they will allow us to move forward when we come back into session. Greg and Kurt and I met with Doc Hastings, who chairs the committee. Greg is a member of the Republican leadership, and hopefully sooner or later they're going to let us move our bill forward. We need a long-term sustainable solution, both for county funding and to resolve the forest wars, so the industry could have a predictable supply of timber, we can get some rural employment going, and we can also preserve the most precious values, the irreplaceable old growth. And then there also is an addition to the Road River Wilderness in the bill, and the Devil Staircase Wilderness at last would get enacted. Greg Walden is taking a lot of heat down in southern Oregon, which we share, Josephine County and Jackson County, for supporting this because it has wilderness and old growth protection. And up here in Lane and Benton, I'm being savaged by environmental groups who claim that I'm going to devastate the last forest. So it's sort of usual. But this is a time when we can't cotton to the extremes in this debate. We've got to get it done. We need a long-term plan. It needs to be sustainable and responsible. And I'm doing everything I can to do that. There are many other things to talk about that are or aren't going on in Washington. And so I think I'll leave the balance of time for questions. So who's got a question? And I'm told to repeat the question. Yes, unless you're really loud.
Two questions. One, how can we rebuild our transportation system when, as a nation, we're basically broke and getting more broke every year? And secondly, how can we improve the rating of Congress as an organization? The general public seems to have very little faith in the organization. And is there any effort to change the way government works so that its image will improve?
Two questions. One is how could we possibly afford to invest in infrastructure? And the second is how could Congress be more functional or acceptable in addressing problems of American people? On the first, A, the country's not broke. If Congress does nothing the rest of the year, which may be the best thing that can happen, on January 3rd next year, when a new Congress convenes, the deficit over 10 years will have been cut by 50%. And we'll be back to Clinton-era tax rates. Tax rates in an era when we had 3.8% unemployment and we actually paid down debt. That's one possible way out of this conundrum. Beyond that, in terms of talking about being broke, I propose that we could tax oil by the barrel, which would mean ExxonMobil and OPEC and others would help share in the cost of supporting the transportation system in this country. I would exempt farmers and manufacturers and everybody else. It would only fall on transportation and oil refined for transportation. I propose a tax on oil speculators. There's very substantial documentation, including the Federal Reserve of St. Louis now, that says 60 to 70 cents a gallon is going to Wall Street, and it didn't used to be this way before we deregulated the commodity markets. So, there's a little leeway in there, and putting a little tax on the oil speculators could help drive out some of the speculators and also raise revenues to pay for transportation investments. We could also, and I propose this, we could just index the existing gas tax, which would mean over the next 10 years, it would go up about a penny a year if you index it to construction cost inflation and fleet fuel economy, which is part of the problem we have. And we could bond about $100 billion and pay it off over 20 years with a penny a year increment. When I drive past the gas station in the morning, I come back at night, it's gone up a nickel or a dime. Where'd it go? And Exxon's profits, it didn't go to rebuild our infrastructure, put people back to work in this country. I would, I'd pay the penny. $100 billion would solve the problems of funding this bill and more than doing what we need to do to rebuild the existing infrastructure. So there are ways to raise the money to build the infrastructure. In terms of being dysfunctional, very, very big issue. I'm going to say that the problems in the House are number one, scientific redistricting, which is, gerrymanders. If you know the whole history of that, Elmer Jerry, Governor Massachusetts many years ago, drew this bizarre district, and it's named dedicated to him. But what you're ending up with is more and more and more congressional districts that are one party. So all the competition is in the primary, which means you know, the conservative base of the Republican Party can dominate their primary, and the left-wing base of the Democratic Party can dominate theirs. If you look at over time, and I don't have this with me, but just imagine like rainbow arches. 25 years ago, the arches intersected like this, and this area in here was Democrats and Republicans voting together and passing bills. And they've kept them, now they're just about separated. They hardly ever intersect, which I would attribute in great part to partisan redistricting. California has a commission formed this time. Oregon actually did a fair job, one of the few states that was able to do it legislatively and not do it on a partisan basis. That's rare. The last several times we did redistricting, it was done by the courts because our legislature didn't agree. So I think longer term, going to the commission form of redistricting in all the states and choosing who gets to be on the commission is a key part of that. The Senate and also the House, the other totally corrupting influence that's making it more and more dysfunctional is money. You have all but 5%, I think, of the Republicans have signed a pledge to a guy named Grover Norquist, you might never have heard from, who says that they will never, ever raise revenues for any purpose. Not deficit reduction, not to build a transportation system, not to educate kids. There can be no new revenues, and that includes, you can't allow the Bush tax cuts to expire. Those are considered new revenues, going back to the statutory rates of the Clinton era. So when you have shackled yourself like that, how are you going to ever make progress on the problems confronting the country? The deficit debt is a big deal, but so is investment in education, in infrastructure, and other things we need to do. Shackling yourself like that, it's impossible to deal with. And then, you know, there are many people on my side of the aisle who shackled themselves, not quite in the same way, but to ideology where, you know, they can't approach these issues in the middle either. I voted for and was the principal Democratic backer of a constitutional amendment requiring balanced budget this year. We failed to get enough votes. Most people on my side of the aisle voted against it. I did the same thing back in '95. If we had passed that amendment in 1995 and had the Bill Clinton as president, the tax rates he put into place, we would now be paying off the last of our debt. So we wouldn't be so-called broke. We're not broke, we got good credit, but we don't have a will to address these problems. You know, the money in politics is destroying our country. And I have a whole lecture I gave on this. I just lectured over at Oxford last month. I was invited over by a Dubois professor who was there to talk about what's happening in American politics. This is going to be a $12 billion election year. $12 billion. And probably half that money is going to be spent by, you know, less than 100 people. Or, you know, maybe a few hundred or a couple of thousand. The Republican primary would be over today if it wasn't for two billionaires who decided to invest in Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum. We are becoming dysfunctional. The Supreme Court and the Citizens United decision has done the most damage to our representative democracy now and forward. Money was already a problem, now it's an unbelievable problem. Someone promises to spend $1 million for you or against you, you don't think they're getting influence in that election? That's what the Supreme Court, 5 of them said, that it may give access, it may give influence, but it's not corrupting because it wasn't quid pro quo. You didn't promise a specific thing to get the $1 million to spend on your behalf. It's extraordinary. So those are a couple of things we got to face. It's going to require a constitutional amendment, among other things. Yes, sir.
How do you feel about the debate, the Social Security debate, whether the math being discussed is honest and whether the system can become solid or is solid?
Well, Social Security, I've been reading the trustees' reports for a quarter of a century. Under you know, fairly conservative assumptions, Social Security will have adequate resources if we can honor the debt of the United States, because Social Security's money is all invested in special treasury bonds. But if we can honor our debt, then Social Security is totally solvent until around 2038, at which point it would only be able to pay 75 to 78% of promised benefits. That's not broke. That's a system with a problem. There are a range of solutions out there, from the that deficit commission that said raise the age, but also raise the cap on the contributions. To people to just say, just raise the cap, eliminate the cap on contributions, and you raise more money in social care needs, and you can lower the tax rate on everybody. But it is not broken. And if you look at America, before Medicare and before Social Security, there was a massive poverty rate among seniors. Those systems need to be continued, but they need to be continued in a sustainable way. Medicare is a much tougher issue than Social Security, in my opinion. Yes?
What about the postal system? One thing they tell us.
The postal system. I say to people, what's it called? The USPS, United States Postal Service. So when they tell me they got to close little post offices in my district because that little post office isn't making money, I said, no, they're part of the United States Postal Service. It's not the postal business where every unit has to make money, because those post offices are critical to those communities. I think we are poorly served on the current governance of the postal system. I've got a bill which has some support, which would say, let's do a few things. The post office is being required to prepay retirement health insurance for 75 years. That means people who are not yet born, who do not yet have a job at the Postal Service, we're putting money on deposit for their future health retirement costs. That's kind of extreme. I don't know anybody else is doing that. That's $5.5 billion a year. The Inspector General says if you wanted to prepay for all existing postal employees throughout their entire retirement, which no one else has done, no company, no other part of government, it would be $1.7 billion a year, okay? We just say $3.8 billion, we're still prepaying health insurance no one else is doing. Then there's a very complicated formula between civil service retirement, the old system, FERS, the new system, and all the experts say the Postal Service overpaid the Treasury by $50 to $70 billion. Well, let's pay that money back. We'll do it in installments. That's the government has problems. But let's pay the money back to the postal system. Then let's look at what the postal system does. Let them compete. You want to talk about competition? Let them compete. In other countries, they're getting into internet services. In Sweden or Switzerland, if you get junk mail, you sign up, they will scan the envelope, and you say, send it, or you say, open. They'll open. They'll scan the inside, and then you say, send it or recycle. They're saving money by not delivering all the junk mail, and they're making money by charging people for this service. Allow them to deliver beer and wine. It's exclusive now to the private sector. And then allow the Postal Rate Commission to set rates. They aren't allowed to set rates. When the Congress many years ago said you can't raise rates more than the rate of inflation. Well, we haven't been having inflation, so they can't raise the rates. If you could reasonably raise the rates, looking at what it costs to do things, they did all these things. They could be still making money. I don't think they have to make money, but they could be making money if we just did those 4 or 5 things. And on the rates, they have 14 lines of business, they call it, and 13 of them lose money. First class doesn't. If they turn us from 2-day delivery or overnight delivery of first class to 5-day delivery of first class, which would be much longer than it took for Jefferson to send his wife down in Virginia a letter during the Constitutional Convention by horse post. There will be a flood of people out of first class. Their only line of business that makes money. So they've got to do some sensible things here, and I think the current governments have asked for them to get rid of the so-called Postmaster General and bring in a new crew and change the governance of the Postal Rate Commission, who says that the things he's doing don't make sense. That if he goes to 5-day delivery, that he's going to hemorrhage customers. If they close the postal centers, the sorting centers, and we have to send a letter that's going to go from Brookings to Gold Beach, first has to go to Portland and then go back down to Gold Beach, that it's not going to save the kind of money that this jerk who's running the Postal Service says it will. So I've asked the president to fire him, and he's been very quiet on the issue, and anyway, it can be fixed, and it's essential. It is essential. I get so much email and letters from people who are in small business. I never knew there were that many people who are told, But, I mean, it's just been pouring in since I started talking about this back in the first of the year, and I proposed a bill saying, you know, all these small business people, they're saying, look at the difference between UPS and FedEx and what the post office charges me. I will go out of business if I have to deliver my product using them. So we have a pretty good balance now between the private and public sector, and I think there's some who just think the government shouldn't do it. Well, I think if we're the, you know, how are we going to be the greatest nation on earth if we don't have a national transportation system, and we're the only nation that doesn't have a national postal system? I mean, that's nuts. Yes.
How about a national health care system? If the Supreme Court knocks that down, we'll be one of the only nations without a health care system. Is that a problem?
It's a real problem. We have somewhere over 50 million people now don't have insurance, but we don't deny them care. So where they go to the ER. A lot of times they don't need to be in the ER, but that's where they go. That's where they can't be denied service. And in Oregon, the estimate is obviously their outcomes are, if it was serious, their outcomes are probably worse because they should have seen a doc earlier. So that costs more in the end. It's very inefficient, and then the costs have to get spread somewhere. So according to the Oregon, we're spending, each of us who is insured pays an extra $1,400 in premium every year to pay for those who aren't insured. So we can't say this is a cost-free system we have that doesn't work very well. So, I don't second guess what's going on in the Supreme Court, but to tell the truth, I'd be happy to revisit the work product, because I think we would have written a much simpler, better bill. We got stuck with, under the rules in place and a filibuster in the Senate, we got stuck with the Senate bill. And the Senate is horrible at drafting legislation, except their transportation bills. So, but in this case, the House bill was much better. We had national exchanges that would have lowered the price of health insurance considerably. We had a public plan option which would have helped pull down the price of the private insurance. We had a number of other provisions in the House that were simpler than the Senate bill.
But politically, that won't pass anytime soon.
Well, what happens when this gets repealed? I think, the Republicans came in and won the last election and hard on health care, and they said repeal and replace. We've had many votes on repeal. They have not offered a replace. So if the Supreme Court knocks this law down, then it's time for them to deliver on what's the replace. And if it's more subsidization, than we already have. I mean, Medicare has these Medicare Advantage plans, which are private plans, and the theory was they would bring down the price. Well, they all cost at least 10% more than fee-for-service Medicare. And that was one of the much valued, you cut Medicare. No, just cut the subsidy to the private insurance companies under Medicare, because they were making out like bandits under the subsidies they were getting. That was the cut in Medicare. So maybe going back to, just all fee-for-service in Medicare, maybe looking at Medicare for all. There are things we could do. So, that may put us to a point where, Congress doesn't act very well unless there's a crisis. And I think the total repeal of that bill would constitute something close to that. So, a bunch of people whose kids are, I've talked to a lot of people whose kids, up to 26 are saying, thank God that changed that. And a good friend who's got an auto repair shop, they had to keep cutting back on their insurance, but he's still providing insurance to his employees. He said, I just had a colonoscopy and I figured it's going to cost me $2,400. He said they said it was free. And he said, my insurance didn't go up any more than the last 4 years. And I said, yeah, it's a preventative health care. And wow, that's great. And then, or another guy I know's kid has very severe problems in childhood, and they could not get their child on their policy. And because we said, you can't exclude pre-existing conditions in kids, minor children. The child now has health insurance. Those things all go away. I think there's going to be an outcome. Yes?
You alluded to a couple of things. One was the rules of the House. I'm not familiar with the rules of the House as I am with the Senate, which instructs so much what wants it done because of the demand for 60% of the vote on routine things like the floor. So my question is, does the House have rules like that should be changed that during the technical change? The second is you said that there have to be a constitutional amendment to change the rule that corporations are Texas executes a corporation. And so until that happens, do you really think there has to be an amendment? Can't the legislators make a law that says, from this point on, corporations do not have freedom of speech for elections?
Okay, I'll try to be quick, because this is too lengthy. Two questions. One is rules for the House and Senate. The Senate has a custom of, it's not it's not in the Constitution to have a supermajority vote to do anything, 60%. That's how we ended up with that version of healthcare. That's where a lot of things got stopped recently, and one person put a hold on anything indefinitely. I mean, it's pretty dysfunctional. Jeff Merkley led a fight to try and change that. We'll go back to a simple majority. I think they got 6 votes, but he's trying. The House has a winner-take-all system, 100% winner-take-all. If you win, you set all the rules. And anytime you want, you can violate the rules by passing a rule to change the rules. And that is done. That has been done frequently, and both parties are guilty of that. Every bill comes up under a rule, and you say, we're keeping these rules, we're bringing up the bill. So the House needs a more discrete reform in terms of some sort of permanent, long-standing rules, no matter who's in charge, that would restrict some of the more abusive practices. And somehow, we need to get to that. The second issue, mine's going quick.
Amendment?
Yeah, on the Supreme Court Citizens United. Actually, if the Supreme Court decided, could have decided a very narrow case. It was very unusual procedure, if you called it. They said, well, we heard the arguments about the movie about Hillary Clinton, and we could decide that, but we want to now hold a second hearing on issues that were not before the court, including reviewing past decisions of the court and a law passed in 1916. So they had a second oral argument on something that wasn't at issue. It was a theoretical argument, and that's how they came to the conclusion that the influence and access don't matter, and it's not going to undermine the democracy, which a Supreme Court decision from '77 said yes, it will. So they overturned all that. There is a case but there are no facts. It was a theoretical case. There is a case with facts from Montana, which has been appealed to the Supreme Court. They haven't taken cert on it, but it was actual, corruption which resulted from this type of a system in Montana, who passed very strict limits on corporate and individual contributions. And if they decided to take that case, then they would be deciding these issues on facts as opposed to fiction or whatever you want to call it. They decided on. It's not likely they'll take it up, but I'm wondering after they watch this election cycle and the majority Republicans might say, geez, we would have beaten Obama, except Romney got so beat up because 2 billionaires funded 2 guys against him who shouldn't even got past the junior, tryouts. They might decide that maybe this wasn't a great idea for the country and or even partisan leanings in this country. So who knows? Maybe they will take up the Montana case. If they don't, it would require a constitutional amendment. There's nothing. We could do disclosure. We could require disclosure and make the billionaires say, I paid for these ads, which people might say, that one guy paid for all these ads. We passed that in the House last session before we lost the Congress. It lost by 1 vote in the Senate. Disclosure is about the only thing you can do under their very wide-ranging decision. Otherwise, there's constitutional amendments to undo it, change it, restrict contributions, etc. I'm on 5 of them, but none of them are going anywhere right now. That's it, I think. I can keep talking if you want, but people usually like to leave. Go ahead.
Your friend Don Dole, a Democrat from Roseburg, he got a very good solution when his kids misbehaved. He had a farm, and he made his kids hold hands and go walk out the back pasture for an hour. Is there any way we can make the Democrats and Republicans hold hands and go walk in the field so they can get the country's business done instead of jerking around?
Well, I think I already described the influence there. It's when you have a district that is going to, the general election when is going to be a Republican, you're not going to get your old-fashioned Mark Hatfield, Bob Hackwood Republicans coming out of that primary. Same thing on the Democratic side. You know, I represent a rare district that is the swing district. There's only, according to the pundits, maybe 70 or 80 districts in Congress that are swing districts out of 435. So it goes back to the redistricting problem, it goes back to the money problem. The holding hands among the current crew just isn't going to work, because I'm never going to buy into devolution. I mean, that's nuts. I mean, no offense, but it's, so way down back.
Would it reduce the amount of polarization if everybody participated in primaries?
Well, there are some states that do top 2 primaries, but again, if you've drawn a district that's only Republican or Democrat, you end up with 2 Democrats on the ballot in November or 2 Republicans on the ballot in November, so it doesn't quite get to the problem. It may, in some cases, make it a little more competitive, a top 2. We have experimented in Oregon. The Democrats said 1 year Republicans and independents can vote. And, you know, we had an open primary. The Republicans tried an open primary. Not many people participated. Well, I guess it couldn't be independents could participate, not Democrats and Republicans. Whatever. So and then there's the whole mischief factor. You know, if you don't have party selection, then you know, it might be that, you know, well, let's get this person in the general election, you know, with crossover voting. It's all very complicated, but the top 2 probably warrants more looking at. I think California's doing top 2 now. I think that was part of their reform. I can't remember, but some states are doing top 2. This will be the last one, sir.
What do you think the strategy of your opponents are?
Can't give you a congressional report, but we can lapse from reality for a moment and say, I really don't know. You know, it may be unprecedented nationally for a son to change parties and run in the primary against when he or she, you know, or his daughter knows that the father's going to be on the general election ballot. I mean, that would be quite a race if I lost the primary. So it's a bit of a start. That's the best thing to say. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you to Congressman DeFazio. Next week, we will be hearing from the Chalkboard Project. They'll be talking about education. So hope to see you then, and have a great day.
Do you want to get the poster?